Vincent Southerland, Dillon Sung, and Hamid with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, the work that they've done to really fight carceral technology and to really use the tools of the system as it exists to really dismantle and work towards the abolition of policing and to work towards the tearing down of carceral technology and really fighting back on that. All three of you, the work that you've done over the last several years has been really inspiring, and I'm really appreciative of you all joining us today to talk about the work that you've created as part of the as far as this rapid response program and joining us from the Rupture Festival. Thank you.
All right, it's now I'm joined by Dillon Sung and Hamid, and really excited and thrilled to talk with you guys both about the work, Dillon, that you've been engaged in, and Hamid, you've been engaged in as well. So let's kick it off. I guess let's talk a little bit about kind of the archive piece and the work you're doing, Dillon, first. How you got interested in it, how you got attracted to it, and then Hamid, I'd like to hear from you, how you got engaged in this work more broadly, and maybe we should go in the other direction. Hamid, maybe you could talk first about how you got engaged in this work, and then Dillon, you tell us how you got involved in the kind of the archiving project.
Certainly, thank you, and thank you, Vincent. And I want to thank Nash for such a nice introduction. So appreciate it. Well, I mean, I think this kind of came naturally to the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition's work because our work has been built itself on the storytelling that we have learned through the various archives as well. One of the couple of the driving values that the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition builds its work is that, number one, that this is not a moment in time, but a continuation of history. So then how are we connecting the history of surveillance and spying and infiltration, going back? I mean, what is the trajectory between lantern laws about 300 years ago and ankle monitor? And what does it really mean, and how that has evolved over time through the Red Squads, through COINTELPRO. And many a times we, over the last, I would say about a decade and a half, a lot of conversation around surveillance hovers around technology, around the equipments that we use, around cell phones, social media, Facebook, this, that, and the other. But surveillance and the modes of social control precede that for decades and centuries. I mean, this is how, when we talk about patriarchy, when we talk about settler colonialism, when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about capitalism, and now increasingly scientific objectivity, surveillance has been really central to gather information. It's basically just trying to keep it down to so the coalition tries to keep the conversation down to a very ground level. And that's where the archive project was also built as well. That what we have learned and the shoulders that we are riding on, what at this moment in time, what is our fight? What is our defense? How are we building that grassroots power? How are we decolonizing the knowledge? And how are we just kind of making it available? But also making it available not just in the language that is given to us or how we are described, and Dillon will talk maybe more about that too, but how is it being understood and expressed on the street? So kind of developing new vocabularies around that too. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Dillon. And Dillon, I'd love to hear from you, kind of both reactions to what Hamid just shared with us, and also kind of how you got engaged and involved in the project itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I should introduce myself or my pronouns. So my name is Dillon. I use she, her pronouns. The only thing different in the video description of me and me currently is that I'm not wearing pajamas, and I'm wearing some makeup. So that is the kind of level of respect I have for Eyebeam and its audience. So so yeah, I got involved in the archive project through just being part of the space. I've Hamid and Jamie and other members of the coalition have been, my comrades for a number of years, and I got to know that the coalition was working on Public Records Act requests, and so wanting to house it in a website, make it accessible to the public. So I just jumped on in terms of trying to figure out how to get it started logistically, try to get funding for it. And it just kind of happened that way through kind of a long-term kind of community building and kind of mutual trust that we already had in place. And yeah, really excited about the next steps of the archive project, where we are going to be working with archive fellows to develop folksonomies, or our own community-generated vernacular vocabulary, in response to the kind of predominantly kind of state language, the predominant use of state language in these PRA documents. And so because we want to make it the most accessible and usable to community members who might not have any knowledge of state language, state categorizations, which are kind of mostly how these documents currently are kind of organized as or around.
Yeah, and just for folks who just to make clear for folks who might not have heard Dillon say this before in the introductory video, PRA is Public Records Act requests. So those are requests that are filed by folks seeking publicly available information about particular processes or issues going on in their communities. In this case, I know that Stop LAPD Spine Coalition has done incredible work making those types of requests, and really, I think, giving voice to the kind of the phrase that many people hear, knowledge is power and information is power. And I think the thing that really kind of strikes me about the archival project and the kind of value of it is that so often these technologies and these tools are, particularly as they become more and more complex, are unfurled and released into communities without the knowledge or consent of those community members, and are used in ways that are incredibly pernicious. And Hamid, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you talk about the surveillance, concerns around surveillance being concerns that have been with us from the beginning of our kind of nation's history. You think about enslavement, like the entire enterprise of enslavement was built around the use of surveillance technologies. And when I say technologies, I'm not talking about obviously computers, but people are literally branded with hot irons into their skin to mark you, your family members, your loved ones as the property of another, or to demonstrate that you had engaged in some type of conduct or misbehavior. You literally could not leave the confines of where you were forced to work without having a pass of some sort that would allow you to roam those spaces with at least some measure of assurance that you wouldn't be harmed by people seeking you out. And so this kind of these tools of surveillance have been with us for such a long time. And I'm curious to hear, Hamid, if you could share kind of some of the successes that Stop LAPD has had in kind of battling back against and pushing back against some of those surveillance efforts, and kind of how you see the archive is playing a role in kind of the future of the work that the coalition is going to be engaged in.
So the Stop LAPD Spine Coalition basically started about 10 years ago, and it was coming together of folks who have historically been involved in movement building in Los Angeles. I myself have been organizing in LA for about 35 years in various capacities at South Asian Network, LA Taxi Workers Alliance, and then this, and then. So it was really an understanding of folks who had been building grassroots power, but also constantly confronting state violence, the national security, police state, particularly post 9/11, as a name like Hamid Hussain Khan, immigrant from Pakistan, had been targeted quite a bit by the FBI visits and secondary inspection and third inspection, and just this, that, and the other. But so if we talk about the way we have built the coalition's work, I think it's also critical to lift that the narrative that we have built really became our guide. because historically speaking and the conventional understanding of surveillance is pretty much rooted in the invasion of privacy. That's a context that everybody kind of approaches that. But from us, and particularly as non-white individuals, black and brown, migrant, unhoused, undocumented, queer, trans folks, it was very clear, obviously, historically speaking, that privacy is a very limited kind of a scope, and it's almost like a privileged space, and I would say even a white privileged space to be, where our bodies have been bared, and then we have been, as you said, branded, and colonization, our histories have always been written. So privacy, in a sense, what does it mean to us? So to kind of just really shift that and pivot a radical shift from invasion of privacy to the intent to cause harm. That how surveillance has been a methodology and a practice with the intent to cause harm, that how information is collected and in order to contain and control and criminalize, and then to trace and track and monitor and to stalk people. So in a sense that, branding people happening in many different ways. So that really helped then elevate, and even for us to even talk about it before the coalition started, we spent, and when I say we, a whole bunch of folks, spent a whole lot of time, about 8 to 9 months on the streets, talking to different folks who are based out of Skid Row. So for us, it was really critical to lift this work, that how surveillance is tip of that policing knife, that how race and poverty and suspect bodies are policed. We're not lawyers, we're not, in a sense, academics or technologists, but just, day-to-day grassroots organizers. So I think that to me was really one of the biggest successes in kind of shifting that narrative and then kind of building from there. And then, we have weaponized the Public Records Act request quite a bit. We won 2 public records lawsuits. We launched a campaign against LAPD's predictive policing program about 7 years ago. Yeah, I want to honor my comrade, Jamie Garcia, who took the lead and led that campaign. And through public records and weaponizing that, we released a report called Before the Bullet Hits the Body, Dismantling Predictive Policing. And in that, we showed that how, and here, something you stated earlier, Vincent, I just want to kind of build on that about the feedback loop of racism in, racism out. But what the coalition did was to kind of just move beyond that, move beyond the feedback loop and move beyond the ratchet effect, and started looking and decentering the predpol piece and decentering that and looking at the ecology as where did it come? So that's where we started looking at the academic complicity, that it was the academics who helped build this counterinsurgency program to predict insurgency. It was the Department of Defense, so the federal government comes in by seeding these programs, the role of BJA, Bureau of Justice Assistance, for funding these programs, then the city government itself and its complicity, then the land developers. So in essence, where we have reached a stage now that we are making these direct links between these tactics of surveillance and between land. That it is about gentrification, it is about development, it is this mode of new settler colonialism, which is being masked by these pseudo-scientific kind of approach, where the conversation is still limited between the feedback loop, but it's much bigger than that. The algorithmic ecology really helps us understand that how we build these abolitionist tools, where it goes beyond the quarantining of communities in Skid Row, but really looking at that how these penthouse suites are being built around the dirty divide.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's so incredibly important. Especially when you're talking about kind of going beyond the dirty data feedback loop concerns. I think those are certainly valid concerns. But to me, the answer to these problems is not kind of fixing or scrubbing the data or cleaning up the feedback loop, right? The technologies don't exist separate from the systems within which they're being used. And you have a system like the criminal legal system, which has been premised on the domination and control of Black and brown bodies. You're basically slapping kind of a nice engine on a car that you already know is deeply problematic. What does that get you? Kind of nothing good, right? I don't want to make this system that we already know and I've been battling against for my entire career operate more efficiently and operate better. As a matter of fact, I think the system is actually operating exactly as it was designed from the beginning, right? It was always designed to do this. You think about the criminal law as a tool, as an algorithm in some ways of who is free and who is not, who could go places, who could not, who could do what, when, where, and why, and how, right? And so, and all divided along racial lines. And so I think about these systems not as broken, but actually is working exactly as they should. And, to the extent that people are approaching these technologies with the idea that we'll be able to improve these systems, improve the operation of these systems, I push back on that premise. I really think that we should be trying to figure, if we're going to use the technologies at all, we should figure out ways to use these technologies to dismantle these systems, right? To dismantle the use of policing, to dismantle the use of prisons and jails, and the investments that we make in those pieces of the criminal legal system. I think you're very, appropriate to kind of focus on that entire ecology, because so many actors are complicit, and complicit possibly without even knowing the level of their of what they're engaged in, to make these systems operate. Dillon, I'm kind of curious to hear from you and kind of hear your reflections and thoughts about all this, and kind of I'm struck by the fact that the archival project is not only kind of an archive of the requests that Stop LAPD has made and successfully been able to get a hold of over the years, but it's also kind of an archive of resistance to these technologies and these tools as well. So I'm kind of curious to hear about your thoughts about that, and anything else that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what the coalition does so successfully is kind of resisting the datification of our bodies, where we kind of basically we're conforming to the technologies that are supposedly meant to help us, and thus conforming to the expectations and discourse of the corporations that produce these technologies, rather than kind of the other way around, or hopefully the premise is the other way around. And so with the archive, and which is just really an extension of the work of the coalition, part of the abolitionist technology that we're trying to create is that kind of resistance to datification, that resistance through community research, through community knowledge building, which I think is really crucial in the community archive project that we're building. And yeah, certainly we don't want the archive, or our archive, to be another kind of mirror repository of state documents. We don't want it to be like considered a data dump where only those who are kind of interested in reading these documents would actually have access to it. We are hoping to work in conjunction with the PRA working group within the coalition, with local archivists and library organizations and communities, in order to do community research in relation to these documents as well, and also create our own kind of a decolonial abolitionist language, which I think the archive project is especially kind of aimed and geared to facilitate.
Fantastic. So Dillon, I think you got the last word. Because I know we're at time, but I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with both of you, and I couldn't be a bigger fan of the work that you're doing. I think there is everything right about taking the technologies that we have and using those tools to dismantle these systems that we have in place, and build something different, better for all of us down the road. So thanks so much for all the work you're doing. Hamid, great to see you as always. Dillon, wonderful speaking with you and being in conversation with you as well. And congratulations on a phenomenal project. Take care, everybody.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate the framing that these systems of oppression and these systems of repression are they're not broken. We don't need to fix them. We don't need to make them work better. They're working exactly the way they're designed, and unfortunately they're working really well. And it's great to hear that folks are engaging in building projects that work just as well, if not better, in building the resources for our communities to be able to fight back, to be able to break down those systems.